Hi guys, this is kind of a, I don't know, follow up on the talking about tubes, a little bit about tube theory. I thought I had a couple tubes that went to air, and I thought, well, I'd just get them opened up and show you some of the parts inside. Uh, what is represented along this line here is a 6DQ6 tube. Usually it's a horizontal output tube used in a TV. And this is a 6SN7 dual triode tube. You'll find them a lot in TVs, but you can find them other stuff. I thought I'd start off with, hopefully I can get this on here and show you. Both tubes, I made use of the socket on this one to make an adapter socket, so I didn't have it to show you. But both these tubes went to air on their own. There's two different ways for them to go to air. One is outside physical damage, where something happened, the tube got smacked, the top got busted off. A lot of these style tubes here, like the 6DQ6 or some of the older tubes with grid caps on them, sometimes they'll go to air because of damage, because the grid cap has gotten smacked and broke the glass tube. And you also get smacked in the side. The glass is pretty thin and they can break. Your miniature tubes is real notorious because they got the tip on top where they pulled the vacuum off, and those can get broken off pretty easily, and of course the tube goes to air. The other way of going to air is due to the fact of the tube, with time, the expansion contraction of the glass, when it heats up, cools off, heats up, cools off. As time goes on, also glass is fluid. It never truly hardens. So between those two things happening, they'll pick generally a weak spot, which is usually where the pins come through the glass. That's usually one weak spot. Now sometimes I have seen them actually have no cracks, but they actually start leaking right around the pin. That's an extreme rare circumstance, but can happen. Generally what they do, and if I can get this on camera, and bear with me here as it tries to get the light on it, but you see the long arm here, right down inside here. I get just enough light on it, but right down inside here there's a crack, and I don't know if this will help much. Trying to put light on it once it shine back. If I rotate it a little bit, you'll see a little dark spot right there. It's a crack coming from that pin down into the center there, and if I bring it up, maybe it'll show up a little better. That's a crack in there, and that's came from heating and of the glass, and then cooling and heating and cooling, and the expansion contraction, and it extends from, it started at the point where the metal goes through and on the pin lead, and extended down. So the tube went to air. From there, air started leaking in. Now we'll just kind of zoom in on some of the parts and we'll talk about them a little bit. Get things just right here. The 6DQ6 is a high current tube. It requires quite a bit of heat on the cathode, so it's got a much heavier filament or heater. As you can see, both of them are folded type. Now there are some that were made where they actually look like they just twisted the two leads together. Bent the filament and then just twisted it up. The white on the outside is basically it's a coating, insulated coating, kind of similar to ceramic, but it's a little different. It can withstand a lot more heat than ceramic can. But at the ends, the coating cannot sustain, so you probably see it kind of open on the ends where they bend real sharp. So those are left open, but they're perfectly fine. But the biggest thing is just the fact that they're different size. The 6SN7 requires less heat. It's a low powered tube, where the 6DQ6 requires a lot more heat. So this filament draws a lot more current. It's a higher current as opposed to the filaments here. And of course there's a dual set here because it's a dual triode, but yet they hooked to the same leads. Now we'll move on to the cathodes. This cathode came out really nice, and it's nice and clean. On there, let's see, get it in the camera. There we go. Now this very thin, I know you probably heard me talk about it before, but the very thin little ribbon there, and it's basically all it is, just a very thin ribbon metal. That's what hooks the cathode to its pin. It's known as a cathode fuse, and those are designed actually to burn out if the tube is too short or draw drastically too much current, so to protect other circuitry in whatever the tube's in. It's by far cheaper to replace a tube than replace certain stuff, certain circuitry, so such as transformers, things of this nature. So that's what they would do, is they'd put that on there, and it will burn out if the current gets too high. But the cathode on this one is nice and clean and fully intact, even though the tube had some decent age to it. It's been used quite a bit, and she's got a good coating on her. So, and that's your oxide coating that produces the electrons when it heats up. Now, these guys, that's on the 6SN7 look a little beat up, and a lot of that was because when I was trying to break glass tube and everything, they bounced pretty good against the grid, and it knocked a lot of the coating off. Otherwise they were actually pretty decent shape, I imagine anyway. There were quite a bit of it got knocked off. But you can see the size difference between what would be a lower powered tube versus a fairly high powered tube. Considerable difference in size. Now moving on to the grid package. Of course, the 6SN7 dual triode only has just a control grid, and that's all it is. That's all grid is. It's just very thin wire wrapped around two posts, making a ladder-like configuration. And then one of the posts would go ahead and go and connect to the grid pin. If it was like the 30s tubes, and then this would go to the cap. Newer tubes, they started putting the grid on a pin on the socket, and you just hook to the grid underneath the radio chassis. The 6DQ6 is a beam power tube, and it's going to be real difficult for me to try to show this. I'm going to back the camera back up because it seems to focus better in a lot of cases. close, but there's two grids there. You can see the two posts, and they do have a little bit, especially the screen grid has some sag to it, and it just comes from age. A lot of usage, a lot of current going through this tube. These should be fully lined up. On a beam power tube, the grid wires are in line. Screen grid to the control grid should be in line, and with it sagging some, they're not as perfectly in line anymore, not all of them, but there are some that are. If you can kind of notice, and I don't know if we can get that on camera, I'll try to see if I can get it in as close as possible, but where they're into the shafts, the cutouts for the wires to weld into the shafts are in line. So even though the wires themselves on the grids are not appearing, they're close enough, and when the tube was new they were in dead perfect alignment. What that allows is a direct shot through for the electrons to go through without bouncing into something, physically hitting a grid wire. And what ends up going over top of that is the focusing shield, which is this. The electrons come right out these areas here. This is connected to the cathode, so it's at a negative potential. This would slide over top like this, and what it would do is as electrons come through, with this being a negative potential, they don't want to go near it, so they group together and come real close to each other and actually focus. It makes a focusing point for them, so it comes into like a V where they focus at that point throughout this whole area, and that does two things. One, it kind of slows them down for speed, so that they don't bounce as much on the plate, and with this being negative, what does bounce will go right back to the plate. But it gives even better control of the electrons hitting the plate. You have better control of them so that you get a good stream of electrons hitting the plate, and it allows for a lot more power to go through the tube. Now this is here's the plates to the triodes. This is basically where your getter was. Now this is called a getter, but the actual material that was inside just this part is actually the true getter right here. This little kind of a U-channel, maybe I can get some better light on it. I don't know, that's actually a lot of light, but I get right up there. You can kind of see that piece that's burnt through. It burnt through basically, I think, when she went to air. It could have been when they fired it, but that contains the metal, getter metal that's in there. Generally beryllium, or there's a few other choice metals, but most of the metal will go to the outside of right above this to the tube. That's that shiny that you see on a good tube. That is your actual getter, and when it goes to air, it'll turn white, cream white color, because it's oxidizing. But inside here is where everything goes inside. The cathode down through the center right here, and then the grid on each side would fit inside of your plate. Whereas on this one, much bigger plate, the main electron focusing areas is right along through here and through here, not on the sides, but It's on either side of this. They actually will focus into these two areas here. This would fit in just like so. So you can see where it's focusing to and kind of blocking them away. From the two sides here, these are left open for cooling purposes. This has a dual getter. Here the entire ring was held together material on both sides here. So this tube, a good one, would have a bright spot here on the glass and a bright spot here on the glass. And of course the plate would hook to the cap on this particular tube. There won't be a grid cap, this is a plate cap because of the high voltage that would be on that plate. And of course you've got your mica sheets, and they're discolored because of the age of the tube. The tube's been used quite a bit. You can really see it on the top mica plate where this would originally been, and then the two grid leads, and then the cathode. You see the discoloration here. This is just from age, and because the tube had several hours on it and stuff. But from looking at the cathode, that was the main thing I wanted to show, was even though this tube had a lot of hours on it and it had enough hours, the glass itself actually failed. The cathode has got a beautiful solid coating on it, so if it wouldn't have been for it going to air, this tube would have still been producing good emissions, even showing really good on a tube tester. Now I want to answer a couple questions or a couple comments. Number one, I didn't really mention it, and I should have, because it really is part of the whole thing. Tubes, you cannot pull a perfect vacuum in a tube. You can't pull a perfect vacuum anywhere on the surface of the earth. You can get really close, and tubes actually get about 99% vacuum pulled. There's only about 1% air still in them, and that's what the whole idea of the getter is. These are, like I say, they have a metal inside this little area here, and what they do is, before they completely seal the tube completely and everything, it's still got the vacuum pulled on it, but they haven't completely sealed it off. They'll bring a ring around, it's coil wire, and they'll charge it up, and it heats these things up glowing red, and when it does, they vaporize the metal in there, and of course it shoots off to the side onto the glass. And what it's there for is any reactive gases that's still left in there, oxygen and nitrogen is the two main ones, it will pull out. And as long as you're down, it's got a good vacuum on it, 99%, then they'll still stay silver. There's not enough there to change their color, but they have pulled it all out at that point. Any air, any oxygen molecules or any nitrogen that's still there inside the tube. The problem is that happens with tubes of any kind is the fact that there's other stuff that's still left in there that don't react with the getter. And basically there's at least one noble gas, if not more. Definitely more. There's a little bit of helium, there's argon gas, some neon that's in our atmosphere, as well as there's dirt, dust, these microscopic specks, but they're still there, along with other gases that don't react at all with the getter, but they exist. And what they do is, over time, if you have a tube that you've used, it's been used, and then for whatever reasons was taken out of service, You know, it could be nothing more than they just got a new thing, a new set, new radio or something. They just quit using the old one. But the tube was perfectly good. Those other materials, over time, since the tube did have some hours on it, been heated and everything, they will actually, they've been somewhat ionized, but they will actually end up dispositing themselves onto the cathode, onto the material that's on the cathode, and with enough time they will actually chemically bond themselves to that. And then say 30-40 years later, you get that radio and you pull that tube out and you test it on your tester, tube tester, and it's testing weak. And you sit there and think, well, it's a weak tube, I'll just replace it. When most likely what it is that it has gotten this hardening coating on the cathode. And that's what I was talking about. When you can rejuvenate them, it's about a 60% success rate. And generally what fails on it, if it doesn't want to work, is just that the heater may fail while you're trying to do this, because the thing you want to do is heat it up good and warm. And by doing that, it's like a 6.3, raise it to about 7 volts on the heater and run it around about 7 volts and leave it for a few hours, at least a couple hours. And generally what that does is it burns off that coating, not the good coating but the bad stuff that's on there. It will cause it to fall off, and about 60% of the time it will actually improve the tube's performance, assuming that the tube isn't sold that the heater burns out, or is pretty much it is not in too good a shape and won't sustain this, or it has actually maybe started to use up some of the cathode enough that it's just not going to work. You see a lot of this, you end up having to do a lot of this with picture tubes, old picture tubes. Don't immediately consider a picture tube bad. You know, as soon as you get a TV set and you put your tester on it and it shows, well, yeah, it's not really showing that good, it's very, very weak, let her sit there at least at the regular voltage, you know, 6.3 volts if that's what it is. You can elevate it some, you can elevate it up to around 7 or so, and let it just sit, and let it boil off some of the impurities back off of the cathode, you know, an hour, a couple hours or so. You'll be surprised, you'll see and come back and test it, and it has came up quite a bit. Some of them come back to life really quickly. They're generally a very low hour picture tube, and the same way with these tubes, they'll come back to life fairly quickly. Others older, they've got more impurities on them and things, and it takes longer for them to come back to life. Anyway, I wanted to explain some of that, and one of the biggest things about the vacuum, as far as oxygen or things like that, the getter, that's the whole purpose of it. It takes care of that so that there's no problems there, because you can't pull perfect vacuum on the surface of the earth. Now, another question was asked about running the heaters without any B+, and about possibly damaging the cathode or poisoning it. It's not so much, especially such as like in a standby mode. A lot of TVs and a lot of radios, especially stereos and stuff, started mostly into the 60s, but they started having like an instant on. Basically, when you shut the set off, the set still had some power going to it, so that the tubes are still warm, and then when you turn the TV on, it'd come on quick, right now. This was kind of an answer to the very early solid state equipment that was coming out, because solid state, you turn it on, boom, it's working. You don't have to wait for warm-up time. The biggest concern that I always had about standby mode, and by the way, there were things done back in the day. They would actually take this out of the set. They were, and some manufacturers even put a switch on them so that you could either have the ability for instant on, or you could set the switch off and have just normal operation. But there was two ways, or two different ideas. Hold on, I have a phone call. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Anyway, I was talking about the running power like in a standby mode or instant on. Now there's a couple different ways that was done depending on the manufacturer. One popular way, or one of the ways, was you kept the heaters at full power and you shut B+ off, and that way when you turn the TV on, you just send B+ out and the TV comes right on. Another way was to shut B+ off but also reduce the power on the heaters down to about 60% of the rated voltage, so 6.3 down around 4 volts or less. I'm not as concerned about possible damage to cathodes. Generally, the biggest problem with this setup wasn't so much damage to the cathode, because it takes a lot to do that. It can happen, and there is a process that can actually cause irreversible damage to the cathode with just heaters on and no B+. But generally, well, basically it didn't really happen too much on these type of setups. Basically what ended up happening more and would cause more concern and have more problems was cutting the life expectancy of the heater. You know, every part basically, and especially the heaters inside the tubes, are designed to run so many hours. You know, several thousand, but still it's a finite amount of time. And after a while, you know, they're eventually going to burn out or give out. And if you're spending part of your time, like with a TV that's got something like this, part of the time is the heaters are being heated, having voltage to them, but you're not running the set, well, you're using up those hours of time. And it would actually, it did shorten the life of the tubes to an extent, and so consequently this type of deal didn't last a long period of time as far as the history of TVs and radios. Sometimes, a lot of times, manufacturers, later models would put switches on them. Some started out that way, and but the ones that didn't, later models, they'd put switches on there so you had the choice of which way you wanted to go. There were actually switch kits that you could get and put on so that you could switch it on and off. There was TVs and the radios, stereos that had this on there that also made a lot of times into shops and had it disabled so that you didn't have this. Mainly just to extend the life back on the tubes that were in there and the new tubes that might get put in. So as far as damage to the cathode, under normal circumstances of these type sets, the duration of time that they would run generally would not cause any problems to it. Now if they were left on like that with full heater with no B+, say for years, then there is a particular damage that can happen to the cathode that's irreversible and cause it to be damaged. And the term used was poison. Actually the proper term, or more appropriate term, is what they call oxide hardening, and it's where the impurities actually harden on and make a full chemical bond and pull full oxides to the surface and make a crystalline structure top. Can't be removed in any way, shape, or form. But that takes years. It takes a long time to do that. As far as if you buy a TV, you know, to restore, and it's got the instant on feature on it, as far as I'm concerned, I would, if it doesn't have any other means such as a switch to shut it off, I would disable it. If nothing else, by just simply unplugging it. But if you're going to use it, you know, on quite a regular basis, I would disable it or unplug the set for two reasons. One, it is using up the life of the heater over time. I mean, those are, when it's not operating and the heater still is, those are hours that you don't get back. The other thing is, in this day and age of being, you know, somewhat concerned about how much you pay the electric company, these sets would still draw at least a fourth of their normal wattage levels, power levels in watts, even when in standby mode. So, you know, that could be 25-30 watts or more depending on the set, and can even be upwards to 100 watts depending on what what kind of set it was, how many tubes is in it, and everything. And that's a decent amount of power being used up for no more reason than just having the convenience that when you turn the set on, it's instantly on. So that's another reason to disconnect it. So that's just my recommendation. But I just wanted to show this stuff to you, and you know, it's kind of nice to see what's inside some tubes, and kind of give you an idea what a couple different styles and how things happen. You know, some of the things that can happen to them, and answer those questions. And I want to thank you for your comments and stuff, and thanks for watching, and thanks to my newest subscribers, and I will see you guys on the next video. Have a good day.